And we're back. Dizzo's Den podcast. Because you haven't got enough of me, whether it's on radio and TV with Hot Mike or the Kolpak and Izzo podcast, we got to do another one. And I wanted to make sure this one was a bit more specified, be a little bit more focusing on either a specific topic, athlete, or journalist that we can talk to. And today, a topic that I was fixated on, maybe is the best way to describe, with the news that the University of Jamestown will be getting field turf coming to Raleigh-Greeno Field for the fall of 2021. Brings up some emotions on high school football playoffs in North Dakota, mandating going to be played on turf fields. This happens in the state of Minnesota, where the state playoff games are all on turf. Can North Dakota do this? And I figure there's only one guy to ask about that who's covered high school athletics in every corner of the state. 2017 North Dakota Sportscaster of the Year, Brad Anderson from 103.9 The Truck joins me to discuss that very topic. Also, his other job is the voice of the NDSCS Wildcats and what happens with science football with the potential of them being moved to the spring. So here's our conversation with Brad. Well, anytime I got a chance to chat with a fellow North Dakota Sportscaster of the Year, we got to do it. So my man, BA Brad Anderson, joining us. I have been spouting off about this on my show for a bit, but you literally have been to every corner of the state, whether it's Lisbon or Bottineau, all over the place. So I'm infinitely curious at your opinion on this, where, and I know you've called games in Minnesota as well, where this has become habit, where Minnesota State high school playoff games are played on turf fields now, quarterfinals, semifinals, and obviously all the way up to the championship now at US Bank Stadium. And this became a hot button for me this past fall, where there were so many awful weather games where schools couldn't even play at their home field, whether it was in Fargo or all the way up to Cavalier, where New Rockford and Cavalier, the top two teams in 9-man, played basically in a mud pile. Now with Jamestown joining the mix, it's almost, I think, Brad, from each corner of the state now has a turf field. So I'll open it up. What do you think? Is this a distinct possibility that could happen?
I think you have to at least bring it up for discussion. I think now with next year they're going to be changing things where it's, the top two classes are basically going to be Class A. So most of those schools have turf anyway, or will have turf. And then you'll have the smaller schools, and I think there's maybe a handful. I think, obviously the one that people know about is the one at Castleton has.
Yep.
I could see, really for the top two classes, I don't know if you have to change a whole lot because a lot of them have turf anyway. And you maybe for maybe a semifinal that maybe you do that at the 9-man level, and then kind of the smaller 11-man level. I still think there has to be a reward for having a good season, to be a number one or a number two seed. So I think you at least have to reward those schools, as long as the field conditions are suitable to give them a home game or two, and then maybe say semifinals you put them on turf, maybe quarterfinals. Obviously 9-man's got an extra round or two, so
right.
Maybe you go quarterfinals and semifinals. So I think it's up for discussion. I don't know if you want to mandate that everything have to be on turf unless the field conditions or the weather warrants it, but I would say maybe once you maybe get to the semifinal round, where the playing field kind of gets level a little bit, then you might want to at least bring it up for a discussion or debate.
I'm not picking on Cavalier, but that game a couple years ago, and I don't know if you called this one the Wymer-Lidgerwood Cavalier playoff game that was in a monster snowstorm, and it was great visuals. It was fantastic to see. But you also wonder, was it the truest form of each team out there that particular day when the conditions were like that?
I was there, yes. And that's a little bit – they cleared the field twice before the game, because I remember driving up there going – and I remember turning off the interstate. I think it's Highway 5 that you get to Cavalier, and and it just kept getting worse and worse. And I thought, oh, Lord, what are we going to be dealing with here? But they were clearing the field, I remember when I got there, and they cleared it again before kickoff. And then the weather actually kind of settled down. It stopped snowing. It wasn't really cold. I mean, it wasn't like just frigid cold. So, I mean, I think the only thing it probably affected was maybe the field conditions a little bit.
Right.
But that's one example. And then, like last year, I think, New Rockford and Cavalier played that game late in the regular season. And New Rockford actually ended up moving their first-round playoff game to Castleton.
Yes.
And I remember talking to Elliot Belquist the week they ended up playing Findlay Sharon Hope Page in the next round, and they lost. But I remember him telling me, he said, had they beat the Spartans, and I think they would have had the home game the next week against Kidder County. He said he was not going to even try and bother playing at home. He was going to see if Castleton was available and go back and do that again. So I mean, I bet if you asked, and his team was kind of suited. They were going to be better on turf.
On
anyway.
turf,
So,
yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I mean, I think that had a lot to his decision too, and that might be, some coaches might be for it just because of the style of football they play too. So. But I mean, it is when you have these facilities and there are more of them out there, why not put them to use? If both teams, think it's, if it's going to provide the best game available.
Because I look at it now, Brad, you go each corner of the state, whether it's Williston and Watford, obviously Watford City have them, to now the middle part of the state, because I thought that might have been a hang-up if you wanted to do this for the playoffs. Like, who are you going to – like, if you're Kidder County, where do you go? I mean, you have to go all the way to Bismarck. Well, now you can go – if Jamestown has it, obviously Valley City State has it. The Fargo metro area has plenty of them here for Region 1 schools. And then Mayville obviously has it. I think people forget Mayville's got one, and obviously
That's
Grand
right.
Forks has one that I think – and obviously you got Minot and Dickinson covered that – unless I'm missing a corner of the state, everybody could go into a certain pod if they decided to go down that road.
Yeah, Bismarck, I mean, you've got the community bowl, though you've got to, make sure that there isn't, you got to deal with Mary and the Bismarck school. Shiloh has one too.
Legacy.
Yep.
And
Legacy
St. Mary's has a new one too. So you've got, I think, 4 options there if you wanted.
Yeah, and I think that's the other factor too is travel. You've got to try and make it, if you're going to make it a neutral site game, that you don't have one school driving 4 hours and another driving an hour.
Yes.
Because I mean, coaches and sometimes schools and Class B schools, they'll look at any advantage or disadvantage that they feel they may have been slighted, and they will not let you forget that. So I think you got to look at travel and how things are centrally located. But I think we've got about every corner of the state, especially in the east. I mean, I think you got your pick of where you could put a game on.
And I'm almost forgetting our friends in Killdeer. They've got a really nice turf field as well. So, I mean, there's another one out in Region 7 territory that could work as well in that neck of the woods.
Yeah, that's another one too. And I think there's – I mean, I feel like there's factors that we're missing on this. But obviously if it's a playoff game, I think the Activities Association gets the gate or something. I'm not 100% sure how all that works, but I'm sure there's got to be a financial aspect to that as well that has to be, from the Activities Association standpoint, has to be taken into some consideration.
Because I'm just looking at this past year, and this is so prevalent in my mind just because of what happened last fall, and you were out there many times as well, where Cavalier had to play a game at Cushman. I believe Langdon did the same thing as well, where they had to play there. Hillsboro, as you know, played a home game in Castleton against Central Cass because they couldn't play. And these are regular season games. That's a whole other issue to get into when you can't even play on your home field. And then Fargo Davies went through it. They've gone through it the last couple of years where they have not been able to play on their home field, and they're playing games at Fargo South or at Shanley like they did this past season. So it just I'm spending other people's money here, but I just think it makes sense if we're trying to get the best team to play in the Dome come the middle of November, that this seems the best road to go. I know the High School Association never wants to copy anything Minnesota does, but this makes sense to me.
Yeah, in Minnesota, I actually did in the early 2000s, before they mandated everything go to turf, and this would have been before St. Cloud State built their turf field, and there was one in Morris and a lot of these places. I did a state quarterfinal game in Becker, which is just east of St. Cloud, and it was there was no snow, but it was a bitterly cold night. I think it was about 18 degrees at kickoff, and that field was like playing on an airport runway. It was hard, and then Becker had a really good program, and they came out for their warm-ups, and then they left and went back in the locker room, and then when they came back out before kickoff, all their skill guys were wearing tennis shoes.
Oh, wow. And
the team I was covering, Litchfield, came out there, and that was, they had to that was their way to counter that. Was they just pretty much, he said, cleats aren't going to work. We're just going to, the speed guys are going to play in tennis shoes, and it ended up working. They won by 2 touchdowns. But I think that was the game I remember, and it was about the next year or two where you started seeing some of those games moving to. St. Cloud State was a big one when they opened Husky Stadium. That a lot of those sections, they were Thursday, Fridays, and Saturdays where they started, playing games there. And then the southeast corner had the field in Rochester, and then you had Morris for some of those games. I know Hawley has played, some state playoff games there, and and I think, if you're going to do that, I would follow the Minnesota model, the MSHSL model, because I think it's worked.
And when Moorhead got it, how big a deal that was for Section 8 games in the opening round of state that they could host there now. I know Concordia did it a couple times, but now that Jim Goda Stadium, they've done that when they've been in the rotation several times, and that's been, Barnesville has gone there or Hawley has gone there, and now you've had teams in our backyard that are, or I know for the 9-man teams, WAO played there and a few others that were playing over at Jim Goda Stadium, and they certainly like that because it was close to their home school.
Yeah, I think that's part of it, too. I know, like, Finley Sharon Hope Page had to move 2 home games to Valley City State last year.
Wow.
We played one, because I would broadcast one. We did that on Monday afternoon after that snowstorm in October.
Yes.
And they had to do one, I think, the following week after the VCSU Vikings played. And I think there was one that ended up actually being a doubleheader. They had Finley Sharon Hope Page play, and then Northern Cass played Oaks right after
That's right.
that. So thankfully there were thankfully that was available, and now with UJ and Jamestown going to get theirs here, I mean that's just another option. And I think I know I don't think it's ever been seriously floated, but I know every time that the Skip Butte Stadium gets torn to shreds down in Wahpeton, that debate comes up even more. Oh, I wish we had turf, and because there was one Wildcat game last year. Well, WAP played on Thursday night, and then Science played on Saturday. And by 5 o'clock Saturday, that field was a disaster. But thankfully, the crews got it. They were able to recover because Science had to play, a couple more home games before, and they were able to recover pretty well. But every time that comes up, the old debate for turf starts to get a little louder.
I wanted to ask, you have such a great pulse on North Dakota sports. With the announcement that came through last week that they are planning to go full bore ahead with high school sports, your thoughts on that, and do you actually see a full season happening in the fall?
I think it's great. I've advocated for it, and talking to some of the, over the summer and following softball and baseball, I think people have looked around and said, hey, we made this work. There's a lot of people that took a lot of time and made the independent baseball thing work and made the Impact League softball thing work. And now it's a little bit different because you are under the umbrella of the Activities Association, and everybody thinking like, okay, yeah, we can do this. Now we sit down like, how are we going to do this? And I think that as long as they. And I would hate to be a school administrator or a school board member right now because no matter what decision you make, it's never going to be the right decision. Some people just aren't going to. Some people say you're overdoing it. Some people say you're not doing enough. I think I'm holding out some optimism that there's going to, I think that will be okay. And I kind of wonder, especially with smaller schools, if you have, let's say, if you've got a football team with 20 or 25 guys and 1 or 2 get it, then what do you do?
Right.
Do you shut it down for a week? Do you say, oh, we're done? And I think that's the tightrope and the slippery slope that schools, especially the smaller level, might be walking through. So there might be. We may get started. There may not be some teams that finish.
I think that's where I'm at as well. I think they're certainly going to start. I'm curious when we get to end of September, early October, and you're mentioning the 9. I'll go the 9-man route specifically. And if 2 players get it, then I'm assuming their season is done. I just don't see how they keep on playing. I don't even know for the bigger schools, frankly, how they go forward on that. That's the great unknown as we're heading into the fall. I admire the attempt. I'm inspired by what you said, by what we saw out of Babe Ruth baseball and the Impact Softball League that they were able to go and do this, and I think that gives a lot of hope to people that this can happen. But there's liability at stake here, as you mentioned now. You mentioned it perfectly. Under the umbrella of the High School Association, there's a whole lot more at risk than it is playing just during the summer.
Yeah, and I'll be curious to see what now that that after they made the announcement and now that they're going to release it, I think this week, if it hasn't been released already, how they're going to go about doing
the return to play. Yeah,
return to play. Thank you. I just kind of drew a blank on that, but I'd be curious to say how much. I'm kind of getting and I haven't talked. Like I said, it's a small sample size, but the people I've talked to, it seems like they're willing to do what they have to do in order to make this work. And I think the sticky wicket. I think volleyball you can probably, I think it'll be tough, but I think you can do it. Swimming is going to be interesting, and football too. I mean, football is going to be the elephant in the room here.
Yep.
See how are you going to pull this off? Because I was talking with one coach, Eric Olson from Milner, North Dakota. He was umpiring a baseball game, and we were talking afterwards, and this was about the middle of June, and I said, "What do you think?" And are you going to be spending? You're going to have to wipe the ball down after every play.
Right.
I mean, we didn't know to what extremes this was going to do. How they were going to do that. So I mean, there's just so many. I think there's just so many tentacles in this thing, and how much. I guess probably too much safety is not enough.
Nope.
And I think that's where we're headed, and that's. I guess we'll get a clearer look at it once that return to play becomes public.
Before we wrap up, I have to ask, obviously, about your main gig as well as voice of the NDSCS football Wildcats, basketball as well. That was the huge news that was made earlier this month on that the MCAC was going to not play fall sports, and then the NJCAA comes out with saying, okay, we are going to allow football to be played in the spring. So, boy, the emotions for you had to go from A to Z. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do on my fall Saturdays to now maybe my Saturdays in late March and April are going to be busy.
Well, yeah, you're already going to PAC, which is already a busy time of year anyway. And you're just going to slap some more on it. It's like, thanks a lot. So I was talking with a couple other folks in the media, and I thought last week I was at the Red Hawks game, and we were talking about that. It's like, boy, when this thing finally settles down, and it will at some point, I mean, it's all hell's going to break loose here. I mean, there's going to be 1,000 events and not enough people to go cover them. So, I've kind of accepted the fact now that it's the Saturdays in the fall. I'm just going to have to find something to do, which is fine. And the spring football thing, the impression I haven't really talked to anybody at Science here in the last week or so just to kind of get a feel on what's going on. I kind of get the feeling the MCAC isn't in a real big hurry to make a decision on this, and I guess they really don't have to. It's July, and this thing is changing every day. So I don't know at what point do you go October 1st or November 1st to say we're going to do this. I know in the initial vote, from what I had heard from people at Science, I think there was a couple of I think it was 7 no, 2 yes by the presidents when they made the first vote to cancel the season, and John Richmond was one of the yes votes from the information that I got. So I think Science is on board with trying to go forward. I know the Mondac Conference is going to meet, I believe, next month. I think that's what Stu Engen told me. And before the NJCAA had made the move, it sounded like the Mondac was really trying to move forward, and that they were going to try and move ahead with their seasons in volleyball and basketball and such. There was some questions, I think, on attendance. Will be limited attendance or no attendance? Because some gyms are different. Bismarck State's got a smaller venue. Places like Williston State and the Blickery down in Wahpeton and Devil's Lake got a little bigger venue, so you probably could, I think you could social distance pretty well in those facilities. So, yeah, there'll be some questions up in the air, but you start throwing the basketball seasons, instead of going from November to March, it's going to be January to April now, and I hope so. I hope that and you throw football in the mix as well. Boy, you're going to be gang piling a lot of sports, especially for Science too. They're starting a baseball program now, and And yeah, I mean, I just can't imagine what that will be like if that happens, and hopefully it does. But hopefully we're talking about that. It'd be a nice problem to have, I guess. And then after, and really after, let's say they do play football in the fall, then all of a sudden you got to jump and have a fall season again.
Right. Exactly.
I mean that's just got to be. I know what Izzy and those guys go through trying to prepare and trying to recruit and trying to get 80, 90 guys lined up to have a season.
Yep.
And do that in a short window of time. Good luck.
Yeah, and that's obviously what's facing in major college football as well. That if they were to go and do that, which who knows, I think we may have a decision on that in the coming days. Then what happens to the 2021 season? Is that going to be shrunk down because they don't want to lose any revenue on that front? And if you're losing games, you're losing revenue. And I don't know. It's just the great unknown with so many things right now, and everything centered around football on that front. It's just it's really confusing. This was great, man. Thanks so much for giving us your insight on this. Be well and be safe, and we'll chat again soon, okay?
All right, always a pleasure, Dom.
We appreciate Brad Anderson coming on The Den to talk about a variety of topics. We will have much more interviews like this going forward. And if you have any guests that you'd like us to talk about, feel free to email me, Dizzo at WDAY.com. You can also find me on Twitter at DomIzzo, WDAY. You'll be able to download episodes at the Apple iTunes, or you can listen, of course, at Inforum.com. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and we'll see you next time.